Good morning, gloomy citizens of Ebasagayoka. I know we're approaching Halloween and I couldn't be more excited. So, what do we have slated for our forecast this week? Well, as you can see, it's nice and sunny. It's a beautiful day. For the rest of the week, we have fog, fog, and more fog. Hold on, what's going on here? This can't be. It's not. Oh no, 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 not right now. Please, no, please, not again, please, no. So you're probably wondering how well Silent Hill F fits into the franchise, if at all. I've heard both ends of the spectrum. Some players saying that this game feels like a really strong horror game in its own right, and others that say this doesn't feel like a Silent Hill game in the slightest. I don't consider myself a centrist, but I do feel somewhere in between. Keep watching this video to find out if the game is woted, goated, or moded. And just a warning, there are spoilers in this video, and tons of them, so don't watch if you haven't played the game yet. In Silent Hill F, you play as a teenage girl named Shimizu Hinako, who resides in the remote, fictional town of Ebisugaoka in 1960s Japan. You quickly become familiar with her closest friends and high school classmates, Shu, Rinko, and Sakuko. The latter friend is the first victim of the fog monster when the town is suddenly encapsulated in a dense fog and an overgrowth of red spider lilies, also known as Higambana. In this new nightmarish version of Hinako's town, the streets are void of any signs of life, save for the decaying monsters that prevent her from being reunited with her friends and family while trying to escape. During her attempts to flee, Hinako intermittently experiences dream states, where she awakens in an unfamiliar place known as the Dark Shrine. In this Dark Shrine area, she is guided by a mysterious, masked man known as Fox Mask, and must face a series of trials that will push her to her limits. Initially, these trials start off with Hinako sacrificing her friends one by one, and we come to find out that each friend has real-life issues with Hinako. Rinko, for example, is jealous of Hinako's adoration for lifelong friend Shu, who she's secretly in love with. Eventually, the sacrifices become more intense and costly, as Hinako's mind, body, and soul are required to pledge her loyalty to Fox Mask, who she begins falling for. In other words, she has to sacrifice her friends, family, and autonomy for the happiness of her partner. Keep in mind that the events happening in the Dark Realm are really just a dream within a dream, not to get too Inception-y. And Silent Hill fans know far too well that most things happening on screen are metaphors for the inner turmoil and demons of the game's protagonist. Just like James had to deal with the guilt and burden of killing his wife in Silent Hill 2, here, Hinako must fight with two halves of herself, one that craves freedom and agency over her own desires, and another where traditional Japanese society expects her to be subservient in an arranged marriage. The story has so many layers to it, which also includes how religions are interpreted and how they change over time. Initially, the inhabitants of Ebisugaoka worshipped the divine tree, but after it was struck by lightning, they shifted over to the Inari faith. And the game's New Game Plus adds more elements and multiple endings to color Hinako's story. The first ending that players get by default involves Hinako killing her friends and family in a drug-induced rage on her wedding day. And when this massacre happens, she's taking pills that produce a hallucinatory effect, much like the series White Claudia. The game has plenty of lore, deep philosophical layers, and different interpretations of the story that leave more questions than answers after the credits roll. That's the beauty of Silent Hill. I could do a deep dive essay or an analysis, but that's not what this video is about. This is by far the most beautiful Silent Hill game, hands down. From the details in every back alley, down to how you can almost feel the agony on Hinako's face. I'm sure most fans can agree on this aspect. However, gone are the voyeuristic, canted locked camera angles and rusted metal structures drenched in complete darkness, which was an aesthetic staple of Silent Hill 1 through 3. Because this game takes place in a rural town in the 60s, we don't get to see grotesquely brutalist buildings. Instead, the horror is in the organic, putrescent heaps of flesh that block your path, and the overgrowth of Higambana, which is symbolic of death and the afterlife in Japanese culture. The new art direction feels like a stylistic progression, but I prefer the grainy, kind of lost in the dark feeling of the older games. That look made the Silent Hill universe all the more scary, when you could only see a few feet in front of you and never knew what was lurking around the corner. I do love the enemy design in Silent Hill F, but it feels like there's not much variety. 3 standout enemies to me are the Aya Kakashi, the spawning monster, and the Oi Amoy. The Aya Kakashi are first introduced as scarecrows in a paddy field during a puzzle section. In the puzzle, you get clues as to which is the correct scarecrow to pull a thorn out of, but if you guess incorrectly, well... These enemies become particularly terrifying during the Ebisugayoka middle school section of the game. When you're in the hallways, they start magically populating. The reason this got my heart rate up was because most of them just stood there frozen as I passed them by, so the real fear was imagining them jumping out at me at a moment's notice. The birthing monster appears as a mini-boss in the Dark Shrine, and stands out because she's faceless and has a caterpillar-like body comprised of lumpy masses of breasts and pregnant bellies. Even worse, she can launch eggs that either explode or spawn into enemies, as if they were her children. The Oyamoi isn't particularly deadly, but the design is unsettling. She's a stack of doll heads and parts that skips around and cries in what sounds like a dozen little girls' voices. And if Hinako is next to Oyamoi when she delivers a deafening scream, she gets immobilized. I think the team at Neobards created some exceptionally disturbing monsters that feel right at home in the Silent Hill universe. So the story, graphics, and enemies rule, but what about the gameplay? This is the most divisive aspect that can make or break the game for the player. From the start, it becomes apparent that the gameplay isn't quite like previous entries, apart from a steel pipe that's kind of one of your go-to weapons and has fairly good durability. First, you have 3 main bars, one for health, sanity, and stamina. Enemies like the Oyamoi can deplete your sanity if you're caught in their scream, so you have to keep an eye on your level and replenish it with items like ramune or divine water. When your sanity bar is depleted, you take more damage from enemies. Also, Hinako relies on her sanity to perform focus attacks, where she can lash out incredibly strong hits on enemies. In addition, you're able to perform standard light attacks, which can be performed quickly, and heavier attacks that are much slower, and usually leave you vulnerable to getting hit if timed incorrectly. The game also allows you to dodge and parry if you hit their corresponding buttons quick enough when you're given the cue from an enemy. And then you can also get buffs that come in the form of charms called Omamori that you equip. Depending on which one's equipped, you can get boons like additional health or stamina, while others can make it easier to dodge or increase the durability of your weapons. Then, you can decide if you want to donate any of your items to small Hokora shrines, to convert them into faith, which is a currency that can be used to level up any of your bars or to receive more Omamori. I know my explanation on the gameplay kind of sounded like word vomit, but that just goes to show you how much more the combat and gameplay is involved in previous games. The combat becomes more brutal towards the third act when you get locked into combat rooms. This goes for whether you're playing version A of Hinako, where you have to fight so much that all of your weapons' durability starts waning, or version B of Hinako in the Dark Shrine, where combat is decidedly different. Remember those sacrifices that I mentioned earlier? Well, those translate into new abilities for her. The first sacrifice requires Hinako to amputate her own arm, which is replaced by a giant hairy wolf arm that allows you to smash enemies with relative ease. After that, Hinako gets her back branded and can activate a rage mode that can be used when enough enemies' souls are siphoned. Once in this rage mode, Hinako is pretty much OP and can even defeat mini-bosses with just 1 full meter. That being said, Wolf Hinako's combat is so much more easier than the combat of her other version. I did like playing as the 2 versions of Hinako that were at odds with each other, but like many fans, once that wolf arm scene happened, I started wondering whether this felt like a true Silent Hill game or not. I've seen many complaints online, with some people even saying that this game feels Souls-like. I don't quite agree with that, because the combat does feel clunky in sections and less responsive like a Souls game, but I feel like Silent Hill F feels like 2 separate games. And maybe that's the intention, because it could be trying to mirror the 2 halves of Hinako's mind. The atmosphere, psychological aspects, and even the gore feel like they're pulled right out of the Silent Hill universe. And believe me, sometimes I was wincing at the on-screen violence, so I think they nailed that. But ultimately, I think this game feels like a blend of Siren meets Resident Evil. or Fatal Frame meets The Suffering. Because of that major shift at one point in the story, it really does come across as one of those action-focused horror games. But I did enjoy it, and I appreciate how Konami is pushing the series in the right direction after leaving the IP dormant for many years. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that this specifically felt like a Silent Hill game. For example, if Silent Hill was removed from the title and I played it under a different name, I wouldn't think much of whether it fit into a certain mold or not. It feels like it's a strong enough game to stand on its own 2 feet outside of the Silent Hill franchise. But in terms of a Silent Hill game, this one's kind of molded. Finally, what do you think the F in Silent Hill F stands for? How about frailty? Or friends? Maybe even fear? Whatever you think it stands for, I'm pretty sure it's valid. But also, that subjectivity is what's always been at the core of Silent Hill. What you bring to the table, your life experiences, your fears, your perspective, always makes these games that much more terrifying and heightens the artistry of the worlds that these developers have built. See you on the flip side, now screamers.